Coming up in today's episode of the Conservationists Assemble podcast. How often would they be having more offspring?
The species usually have twins in a very high proportion. In comparison with other gazelle species, is let's say some kind of exception. This species.
Are there any kind of unique characteristics or fun facts about the Cuvier's gazelle that you think might be explained by their behavioural ecology?
At the beginning of the project, reintroduction project, we had, I think there were 3 deaths by snake bites, and always in the 3 cases the bit was in the same place of the animal, in the nose.
Have there been any kind of influences or mentors in your career? And what was some of the best advice that you received?
Well, I've been working with many important people in along my life. I've been now 76, so long career, let's say, and I think that the main lesson was provided by my parents, in terms of they always told me that I should have their work always, because if I had work, everything I want to get is possible.
Welcome to the Conservationists Assemble, the podcast that seeks to unite with Earth's mightiest conservation heroes to raise the profile of our planet's most threatened species by putting the spotlight on the fantastic work of both in situ and ex situ conservation organisations, and highlighting the link between them, as well as asking those important questions of what more can and needs to be done. I am your host, Captain Conservation, a.k.a. Jonny Bloxham, and I am inviting you to join the ranks of the Conservationists Assemble community as we take the fight to Earth's biggest villain and my arch nemesis, extinction. This episode is focused on the Cuvier's gazelle, a species endemic to the Atlas Mountains of northern Africa, and I've teamed up with Eulalia Moreno Mañas from the Arid Zones Experimental Station in southern Spain, who has all of the intel required to inform us all on what it is going to take to defeat extinction. Will you join the fight? Lally, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. How are you?
Well, thank you for asking me to join, and I'm very fine. Thank you very much.
I'm glad to hear you're doing well, and yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the episode today. We're talking about the Cuvier's gazelle. So, Lally, could you please prepare our listeners for today's episode, but just telling us a little bit about this animal?
Well, the Cuvier's gazelle is a mammal. It belongs to the order of ungulates, and in terms, for example, of size, I should say that this is a medium-sized gazelle, and where there is sexual dimorphisms between males and females, maling in terms of body size, the male being bigger than females. And however, both sexes have horns, which is not the normal situation in many ungulates, where only males have horns. This is a very dark gazelle, but the contrasting the rump with the very white, clean white, while in the belly. And I should say that one of the most interesting thing in its morphology is that males have quite a few long horns, very pretty straight horns, as long as 40-45 centimeters length, which is, I should say, much.
We've talked about the colour of their body in terms of various different fur colours. Is there a reason for that? Where are they found, and would that fur have a reason for being those colours?
when these species were common and there were many populations, it was inhabiting the northern part of Africa. As the species is endemic from Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. But unfortunately, now there is only good populations inhabiting Morocco, and in Algeria there is not much common, and neither in Tunisia.
And so, what about the habitat types in those countries? Mainly, obviously, now in Morocco, where we're looking at the stronghold. What type of habitats do these animals live in?
I think that the type of habitat this species use for feeding or for living is explaining part of its distribution in these countries, mostly the altitudinal distribution of the species. This species likes much dense forest, but it is also able to live happily in grassland if it is in, let's say, a relatively high altitude in mountains. So it likes dense vegetation, but it also is able also to live in free of vegetation platform, let's say.
So they're quite adaptable then, and quite hardy in the sense that they can, like say, transition into to altitude.
Exactly. From almost seaside to up to 2,000 meters in height.
That's really impressive,
Yeah.
and yeah, not something that I guess when you think about antelope, and certainly those that live in Africa, you just think of them on kind of flat open plains. So
Yeah, this
yeah,
is,
it's interesting to hear that they do inhabit hilly terrains.
in fact, for example, in Tunisia and even in Morocco, the very last populations living freely in these countries are those inhabiting medium and high altitude mountains. And I think that is the reason why they are still alive in those countries.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess we'll probably get onto that a bit later on when we talk about the threats. But do we largely think that maybe that's just due to kind of less human interaction up in
Mm,
that region?
Well, I shouldn't say it is a matter of direct interaction. If humans wouldn't attack the species, probably they wouldn't mind to be close to the human being. But if there is hunting people or people destroying its habitats or modifying its habitats, then of course it has to modify the place where it is living.
Absolutely, yeah, really interesting point. So thank you for bringing that up there, Lally. And in terms of diets, you've obviously mentioned that they feed in these kind of open oak and well they feed on the grassland. But what do they mainly feed on?
I think in parallel with the wide habitat type it inhabit, it's also the diet it feed on, because it is a browser and not also it is also a grazer, so it is able to feed on shrub, even some trees, small trees, but also different species of herb species. So I think a combination of its wider range of habitat and wider range of feed species it can be feed on. It's a part of its success in adaptation of those spaces.
And so with being quite an adaptable species, what's their lifespan? Assuming that they're quite successful in their home range, what age are we looking at Cuvier's gazelle living?
Most information on this characteristic of the species is got from captivity. And I should say it's a quite long-lived species. Male are able to reach 15, 16 years old, and females a bit shorter, let's say 11, 12, exceptionally 13. But I had no accurate information of the lifespan of the species in wild. I'm sorry.
No, no, not at all. So, and it certainly then highlights kind of some of the work that there's still left to do with them in the wild, so that we can try and determine those characteristics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes.
And so, again, like I said, we're going to get onto to some of the reasons why we're talking about the Cuvier's gazelle a bit later on. But in terms of natural threats, are there any predators that these guys would experience in the wild?
Yes, of course. In when in the 19 and the beginning of 20th century, the main predators of this species were, um, let's say, wild hyenas, wolf, even lions, and because those species also inhabited these northern countries of Africa. Um, Currently, we've been able to detect in Tunisia, where we've been um, um performing a reintroduction project. We can talk about it a little bit later. We've been able to detect by camera traps the African wolf and also hyenas in the same place where the reintroduction was performed. And of course, one important animal attacking this species is feral dogs, which is very a threat that has been indicated in many papers, acting as predators of these species, mostly on young individuals.
And so, actually, it's a good. I'm glad you kind of brought up young individuals there, because now we kind of just want to talk about the reproductive biology of this species in terms of if if the younger individuals are being predated upon, obviously it would slow down the kind of future generations coming through. So, would would adult gazelles be able to overcome this with their reproductive biology, or would human intervention need to take place?
I would say that the habitat they occupy helps them to overcome part of this problem because although the range of habitat, as we said, is very wide in this species, the real thing is that this species like very much dense forests, mostly having a very well developed shrub layer, so they can't hide among all these bushes, let's say, and it is very difficult for predators such as wolves or hyenas to predate on these animals in these type of habitats. So this is part of the story of the species. And yes, we've seen in our reintroduction project how these species behave in this dense habitat when they are freely living, let's say.
And in terms of then, what be that individuals that have been reintroduced or just the existing population out there, how often would they be having more offspring?
Oh, and it is important also in the way of living of this species is the reproductive system of the species, which is harem. Let's say when male and several females and the babies. In general, the male look for its harem in autumn, between October, November, and then he mate with the females of the groups, and then between 5 and 6 months, the new babies are born. That means in the spring. The species usually have twins in a very high proportion. In comparison with other gazelle species, is let's say some kind of exception. This species probably is an adaptation of the way of living, of course. And but in captivity, we've also been able to detect triplets in a few occasions, not much, but 4 or 5 times different females have triplets.
That's really interesting to see. So it must be a lot of work for a female to have three offspring of that nature. So when you say that the Cuvier's gazelle is an exception in the sense that they can have twins in a high proportion, does that mean that other gazelle species typically only have one offspring per
Most,
pregnant?
I mean, I should say that the most frequent situation in gazelle, in the genus gazelle, is one single,
Right.
one baby, is monotochus, we say. For example, in here where I'm working, we have 3 species of gazelles, and only Cuvier's gazelle has twins or even triplets. Dorcas gazelles and Moho gazelles, we also have these 2 species in our field station. They only have one baby each birth.
I think that's really interesting. And do we have kind of an understanding of why that perhaps the Cuvier's gazelle are having twins?
Well, it might be an adaptation of the place where he is living. In fact, in species living in more open areas, harems are much bigger. At least when the species were abundant. So because in literature you can read that, for example, Dorcas gazelle and Mohoy gazelles, or even Thompson gazelles, when they are in wild, they used to have to form groups of about 20, 25 individuals. But in this species, in Cuvier gazelle, it is not possible in its uh, preferable habitat to have so big groups. So probably uh, uh, this species need to have more babies per parturition, as the groups, familial groups, are much smaller than in other species. But this is my interpretation. Of course, it might be another one.
Yeah, it seems to line up though. So yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I just want to go back to you mentioned earlier about how, should humans not necessarily be hunting the gazelles, that you feel that the gazelles would be accepting of kind of inhabiting an area nearby human presence. So, are there any kind of unique characteristics or fun facts about the Cuvier's gazelle that you think might be explained by their behavioral ecology?
Mm, Well, I think in captivity, this species is very curious. If our in our institution, which is not a zoo, I think that is an important a point to mention. Animals are accustomed to their keepers, let's say. But even if some strange people come into the facility, they do not afraid much. And I shouldn't say that is exceptional because they are in our affiliate station. I think it is because they are curious. And I say so because in nature, when we put the animals into the um, enclosures in after our reintroduction, first the step was put the animals in enclosures to get accustomed to the new environment. And so when we put the animals there, some of their problems, I think, was associated to their curiosity. For example, at the beginning of the project, reintroduction project, we had, I think there were 3 deaths by snake bites, and always in the 3 cases, the bit was in the same place of the animal, in the nose. So it indicates that they saw something moving around and they tried to see what it was
Yeah.
and then smell it, which is the first thing that animals used to do. And of course, that was a beeper, because there are beeper in the place where we introduced the animals, and then they beat them and just died. So
Yeah.
after 2 years, I should say that no more animals with dying by this reason were found. So that means that at least in the reintroduction place, they learn what a beeper is. So I think this is part of the dangers that this species may be in front of, because it really like to see what is around in the surroundings, and I think in general these species didn't used to consider humans as predator in their origins.
That's really interesting, though. I suppose because there's this almost stigma behind reintroducing animals that have been brought up in human care, and the sense that they lose those wild behaviors. But this proves that actually in a relatively short period of time, like 2 years, that they can learn, and they do teach, and they do communicate with each other to pass those things on. So it's a really interesting story.
Yes, I think that it is one of the main points in the introductions project, from my point of view and from my own experience, is to be sure that individuals used as founder in the reintroduction still have evolutionary potential to cope with the new environment. And I think this is one of the main points to highlight in our reintroduction. We made a lot of analysis to be sure that that was true, and then we could test if it was true or not. Fortunately, I think I can safely say that our animals had enough adaptability, let's say, to cope with the new environment, and they did succeed, of course.
Yeah, certainly it sounds that way, and I think it's obviously important to highlight that when we reintroduce these animals, that as I suppose it would be easy to focus on animals that are reintroduced passing away as a negative, but actually it is a positive, because then we can learn and we can adapt the way that we're approaching
Yes.
reintroduction. So it is still a learning curve, and an important part of the reintroduction process.
Yes, I think that in reintroduction projects should be undertaken as research projects to test whether all the theoretical things that you know from the animal in captivity, or while it is in captivity, because of course most of the species which are reintroduced now, it is because they disappeared a long time ago. So the reintroduction project should be research project to test all the results you have got in captivity, or even earlier while they were in wild.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lally, I think you've really summed up what the Cuvier's Gazelle is about really nicely. So thank you for that. It's now time to introduce the villain of our story. So, Lally, could you please outline the threats to the Cuvier's gazelle and why we're talking about reintroducing them today?
Well, Cuvier gazelle is a species which is globally threatened in IUCN Red List, and it is classified as vulnerable, and mainly due to the small size of its population in most of the countries where they are living currently. In most of these countries, Algeria and Tunisia, the trend of the population is decreasing, clearly decreasing. But in Morocco, it seems to be increasing in the last, let's say, 15, 25 years, more or less. In fact, it is not very difficult um, to see some animals if you visit the right place. 4 or 5 years ago, I went with my family to Agadir, for example, and we had an excursion to a place where we thought that the species could be. And of course, we had a bit of luck, but we could see a small group of Cuvier gazelle living freely. So it is not easy, but now you can see them in Morocco, in the mid Atlas and the high Atlas, of course.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I'm very happy that you got to see them.
And I was just saying something about the main threats of the species now.
Absolutely.
And I think it's poaching. Of course, it's poaching, and countries must reinforce their measurements against poaching. Otherwise, the species will go away. I mean, quite suddenly, and also habitat destruction. Unfortunately, most places where the species were living in the lower places in these countries are now modified by humans and doing different kind of cities, or even taking the livestock to feed. And this means competition for the wild animals. And in these places, Cuvier gazelle, as some other gazelle species inhabiting the same kind of habitats, suffer about this threat of destroying habitats by humans. And I should say these two are the main, but of course also competition with livestock.
So yeah, thank you for outlining the main threats to the Cuvier's gazelle. In terms of sharing their space with, now domestic livestock, is there any kind of competition from other species in the wild as well?
Yes, considering references of um, different authors who has studied the species in the past, where, for example, Cuvier's gazelle and Dorcas gazelles share the same kind of habitats. Of course, they did compete by resources, by food, let's say. And in a quite recent study that I've undertaken in Morocco, it was in a range. Of course, it was not in nature, but it was a quite big range in Morocco, where Dorcas gazelle, Mohor gazelle, and Cuvier gazelle inhabited together. We found that the three species are able um, mm, to partitioning the habitat in order to not to compete for the same food resource in the same place. And in fact, if we study the habitat use in spring or in the dry season, let's say more appropriately, and in the humid season, the use of habitat of those species, all of them, change due to differences in availability of food resources between summer and winter. And so I think this is important to take it into account in the future scenario of climate change that different studies are given us to for the Mediterranean, let's say, area. It
Yeah,
doesn't matter if it is African or European part of the Mediterranean.
yeah. So I suppose where kind of there's quite a broad spectrum of resources available. As we kind of look at the Mediterranean as a whole and the way that it's shifting, are there any kind of concerns with climate surrounding the Cuvier's gazelle as well?
Well, well, of course, if climate change is definitely change as it is forecast, then there will be some problems for some of these species. Um, I I should say that probably Cuvier gazelle is the one having the less problem because
Okay.
it will be able to modify its diet from herbs to shrubs, even bushes. But I'm not so sure for other species which are much more straight in the habitat wise.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's certainly a kind of a good resource or a good trait to have then for the Cuvier's gazelle that they are adaptable. That hopefully wouldn't be as much as an issue for them as it would for other species.
Yes, I think that this is one of the point because this species, or could be one of the point because of this species is increasing again in Morocco, for example. I think it is able to to increase in population size if it is quiet,
Sure.
if it finds places where there is no the problems, there are no the problems that make them to disappear. No hunting, no the habitat is fine. There is not much competition with livestock mainly because with other wild species it can be.
Fantastic. So, yeah, Lally, thank you for discussing the threats and the issues that the Cuvier's gazelle are facing. And we're now going to shine the spotlight on those who are resisting or trying to fight extinction for this species. So, could you just tell us a little bit about the organisation that you work for in terms of the work with Cuvier's gazelle, please?
Well, I'm not. I'm working not in a zoo. The place where I'm working is an research institute belonging to the main research organization in Spain. In this institute, which is in Almeria, the southeast corner of Spain, arid climate, we have since 1971 on a special facility, let's say, La Joya Experimental Field Station, where since then we are managing three species of gazelles endangered in and classified in different grades of threats by IUCN. Dorcas gazelles, moor gazelles, and Cuvier's gazelles. And our main aim is to make research, but also to conserve these species in the better possible way for being able to restore some new populations in those countries where they were abundant 50, 90 years ago. So we work to reach these two aims mainly.
And so, in terms of obviously, yeah, you've mentioned that you're not working in a zoo, but do you get any support from zoos as the coordinator of the EEP program? Do you get any support from zoos in your role and in your institution?
Of course, of course, without support of zoos, there is no possibility of a captive breeding program being able to be developed because we need to have several institutions sharing with us um, mm, places, money, food. It is important to have zoos taking care of our animals. But most importantly, as we say in Spanish, I think in English is the same, not to put all the eggs in the same bag. So it is important in case of some disaster, let's say zoonotic disease or pandemic, to be sure that animals are in as many places as possible to be able to start again with the program in case of necessity. Of course, I hope it will not happen at all, but one never knows. So it is much better to have animals share around the world, and in this matter, zoos play a very, very, very relevant role. But also because share with us um, uh, economic for breeding so big number of animals.
Yeah, and so in terms of the kind of history of La Jolla's involvement with the Cuvier's Gazelle, what are some of the key milestones of this project, do you think?
You mean reintroductions?
Yeah, in terms of kind of when, since its inception, since it started, what would you say were the key kind of steps along the way in making reintroductions a thing?
I should say that the first step is to know very well the species. Um, and I'm not, I mean to know on the based on scientific knowledge. You need to forecast as many responses of the species as possible before putting the animal in the new environment. New for the individuals you are moving from the found from the place where they kept to their original environment. I know they were there. The species was there a long time ago, but the individuals you are moving, they do not have information about those places, and so it is very important to know very well the species to be able to predict their responses to the new environment. This means to know about reproduction, about um, diseases, very important because most or many reintroduction project fails because of diseases. Animals are very clean in terms of infections in zoos, also in our institution, of course, and they need to cope with the new fauna, let's say, uh, producing diseases in wild. I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it is a disease affecting wild animals in Tunisia or wherever the reintroduction is going to be done, but also livestock. Blue tongue, for example, is very important when you are moving. So diseases is also important to know very well in the place. Of course, you need to be sure that those those threats which provoke the extinction of the species in the place where you want to put them back have disappeared at all. If not, you only will get new animals put there, but probably in a few number of years they will disappear again. And you need to have the compromise, the commitment of the authorities of the place in the long term. It doesn't. It is not only to need it for the first step of the project, because at the beginning, everyone want to be in the photo, but then the project need local support, and I think this is also very important. And you can find all these suggestions in the IUCN guidelines. Of course, it's not my my only my point of view, but I've been able to test all of this, the importance of all these points when you take a project of reintroduction as something to be done until the end, when the animals are again freely living in nature. I think this is very important, and we tried to do all these things when we started our reintroduction project 12 years ago now.
And so, in the 10 to 12 years that this project has been around, for example, how often have you managed to reintroduce the Cuvier's gazelle back into the wild, and are there any kind of plan, or how can you predict when future reintroductions might happen?
Um, we only reintroduced animals once. In 2016. We took 42 animals from two different zoos. One was our institution, and the other one was a zoo in Fuerteventura, also belonging to the captive breeding program of this species, so, an EASA zoo, let's say. And both populations had been separated for more than 10 years. And that was also a point important for the species, because in theory, in different places, if the animals do not exchange, different genetic characteristic of the species can be fixed. And then when you, after a number of years, you put them all together, then genetic diversity of the descendant will increase. And this is true. This has been true in our population, because we've made also the genetic analysis to test that hypothesis. As I said, we move animals only once in 2016, but the growth of the population was very good in the next 3 years. We had between 25 and 30 animals every breeding seasons. That means that in May, June 2019, more than 100 individuals of Cuvier gazelle were born in Tunisia. That is, we had again Tunisian Cuvier gazelle.
Yeah.
And that in that spring, we thought that that was the right time to release them to nature. So we wait until autumn, because that was, in our opinion, the right date for doing the reintroduction, because in autumn is when parents are performed in nature. So we released over 30 animals, and that was very fine. And remember that I said that was autumn 2019, and we had COVID in March 2020 that made things much more difficult for everyone
Mhm.
in Tunisia, in Spain, and over the world. But still, we follow the animals in wild as much as we could, but only having information from animal scenes in
Mm.
the surroundings. And but no more release has been done since then. But we have had informations the very last 2, 3 weeks ago that animals, well, I can't tell you if they are the animals we released
Mhm.
or their descendant, of course, because we did not tag the animals for put them back in the wild. But people visiting Sturge, which is a national park where they release the animals in Tunisia and in the surroundings, not necessarily uh, within the national park. People, as I said, have looked at the animals behaving quite happily in wild. So I can say that although I do not have accurate information of how many animals do we do that there are now freely living in the surroundings of the place where we reintroduce the species, I can say that at least there are enough to be seen by people visiting the place. That means that there are some more, much more probably that they are not seen by these people. So, as I said several years ago, with the reintroduction project, what we wanted is to give a chance to the species to demonstrate that it is able to do it well if they is in the right place. And I think this chance has demonstrated to be successful, not because of me, but because of the Cuvier Gazelle.
That's a really, yeah, really lovely story, and nice to see that kind of after a few years of difficulty in terms of COVID and not being able to be as involved possibly as you might have liked to have been, that people are still seeing them, and there's that glimmer of hope that they've taken to the habitat and are doing what they do best as a wild species.
I think that the thing is the main point is that Third National Park is in a place in Tunisia where almost nobody is living around. There are only a couple of small villages, and people inhabiting these villages um, are respectable with nature, but also they know that the reintroductions also provide them with a way of living because the project took into work many of those inhabitants. So there are new, let's say, um, spaces for giving talks. For example, for stopping buses, there is coffee rooms, little things.
Mm.
But still, there are not many people living there, so they do not need 5,000 of people to work. They only need between 50 and 70, and that is much more than enough in these two villages. And I think this is part of the uh, answer to the success of the project.
So, looking forward to the future of the project and the future of this species, what more can zoos do to help with Cuvier's gazelles?
Of course, I didn't mention, I forget it, that the project has also been supported economically by several IAZAZURs. And this is important not only because of what they did while we were doing the reintroduction, but because of they have been putting money in the Cuvier Gazelle after the project. And then we are now able to do, for example, as I said, molecular things and some other studies on the reintroduced animals, but also in those animals that still are in the captive breeding program. And in case we do need to reinforce these the reintroduction project that we make, or even um, uh, um, plan a new reintroduction project. This is some kind of feedback. You need to be sure to know more and more and more about the species. And of course, because something were wrong in our reintroduction. So we need to detect the reason why we made a mistake or the mistake was made by others. And so we also need the support of those in these new studies. And of course, doing studies is not gratis. We need some money. And we, unfortunately, this project has been supported by SUS until this year. I mean, 2024. I cannot tell you anything about next year,
Sure.
but I'm happy that still I can say that I'm still getting funding from YASA in 2024.
Fantastic. So yeah, Lally, thank you for giving us an insight into the work of La Jolla and just in general everyone that's been involved with the success of the reintroduction programs. Now I would like to switch track and just focus on your career and how you got to where you are. So yeah, could you just tell us about your background and how you ended up involved with the work of the Cuvier's Gazelle?
Um, I'm not very good talking about me. But still, I'll do my best. I am a doctor in biology. That was 1985. And then I got a Fleming fellowship to be working at the British Museum in the United Kingdom. I was working at the sub-department of ornithology in Trink, Hertfordshire. And but by those days I was working on birds, nothing to do with mammals. Um, but still, conservation was something that I always had in my background. But by those days, many people said to me, Lali, it's very difficult to do because you want to do, I mean, wildlife is very difficult to work in wild, and it's much better if you take some kind of discipline to work with in the lab or something like that. So I move a bit and do ecomorphology for a while. But then when I moved I was working in the Natural History Museum in Madrid after being in Britain. And there I was mostly working on ecomorphology of bats. That was my postdoc in the British Museum. But in 1999, I moved from Madrid to Almeria, and I found this wonderful field station that I knew when I was 15 years old, because I visited it, and then I said, "Oh my God, this is again. I'm here again, and perhaps I can do conservation at the end of my career. And that was why I started to work with these animals, these wonderful animals, because I had the extraordinary chance to be this facility at my hand. And so at the beginning, I was a bit lost because I didn't know almost anything about these animals. But that was only a matter of a study, and you are never old to get more information, more knowledge about whatever you want. And I started very hard to work to know about these animals. And since then, and by chance, by those days, Cuvier's Gazelle Studbook was not a coordinator, and so I was asked for the EASA if I wanted to be the EP, the stat bookkeeper of the species, and I said yes. And but those days, that was 2001, but there was no captive breeding program of this species, and so I started to work trying to do to form the EEP, the captive breeding program is EEP, what means of this species. And in 2006, EASA took this program as one of those that the antelopes and giraffe taxonomic advisory group of this European organization promote. So by 2006, I am the EEP coordinator of the program of the Cuvier Gazelle as well. And so I have tried since then to do as many research as possible on this species until I thought that that was the time of thinking in a reintroduction, and that was 2012. And I mean, these projects are very, very long, nothing to do with the pure research project that I used to get before working with gazelles. And since then up to now, I've been trying to do both things as doing my best, research and reintroduction. So here, I think this is.
So, yeah, it sounds like you've really honed your skills and come into your own with this project. But did you always know that you wanted to work with animals in some format?
You mean in mammals?
Or just in
In
general,
gazelles?
did you always know that you
Yeah,
wanted
yes,
to work with animals?
of course, yes. I that was my mom always said that when I started working with animals, that what I was in my fourth degree in my career, my mom always said, I knew you were happy working with animals because when you were 3 years old, you always were um, uh, looking for ants in the place where I was living. So I took, as my mom said, I liked to collect some of these ants and put it in a box and look at them to see how they move and these kind of things. And they always said, Lali, I knew you finally would be working with animals. So probably yes. The answer to your question is yes. I knew since my beginning that I like very much to work with animals.
And what would you say is the favorite part of your role now?
Um, I should say that I always feel as a researcher. I think this is the base on the conservation part of Lali is based on. I think I'm first of all I am a researcher. I try to do the researcher.
Fantastic. And is there one lesson that your job has taught you?
because I've been working with animals for so long, and because I've been visiting um, countries in the third world um, where people do not have as many things as we do have in Europe or in the third world. I should say that the thing that I've learned from my work is that one people shouldn't take from nature more than they they need, because this is the only way nature will give us support for centuries in the future. And this is the thing that I've better learned in my life.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. And in terms of then getting you to where you are there have there been any kind of influences or mentors in your career? And what was some of the best advice that you received?
Well, I've been working with many important people in along my life. I've been now 76, so long career, let's say. And I think that the main lesson were was provided by my parents, um, in terms of they always told me that I should have very work always, because if I had work, everything I want to get is possible. And also, I also always should say the truth. And if you work hard and never lie, Lali, you probably will succeed in every uh, uh, part of your life. So I tried to do this. Other people would say if I reach this aim or not.
Fantastic. And then what would be some of your proudest achievements from your career?
I always say that because when I started, because studying Cuvier Gazelle, there were not many studies on the species. And of course, that was normal because that was 19th, 20th century, but the first half of the 20th century. And most studies and most species were made by naturalists, and nothing to do with the science that we do in the 21st century, or even in the second century of the 20th century. So I would like um, uh, to be remembered as as a person, as a person who has um, shown uh, um, important things to know better the species I've been working with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think certainly no one's denying that you've been a big part of the reason why we're seeing more Cuvier's gazelles in the wild now. So looking forward, what advice would you give to someone else looking to pursue a career in conservation?
Oh, I would tell him or her the same thing that my parents gave me, at least the first. Um, if you want something, work very hard to get it, because everything is possible to be got. Sorry, if you work very hard on it. I mean, I have no doubt on that. And I've tried to convince my students that this is the thing that they have to pursue, because it is, I'm so convinced that it is true, that I think this is the best thing that I can tell them.
What do you think is commonly misunderstood about modern conservation?
Um, I think that the problem is that is people are, public, not people, public, are not really, do not really well know that zoos play an important role in preserving the species, as I told before, because without zoos, most of endangered species couldn't be bred successfully. And I think this is, 40 years ago, Lali didn't recognize that role in zoos. So I think this is one thing that is very frequently missed by public in general. And I think most zoos should make effort in promote its role as supporting conservation. Of course, education is also important. The role of zoos in education is also more important, but you can put together education and conservation. And I think the added value of this camp would be much more bigger than one explaining conservation and another part of the zoo explaining education. Is my point of view.
Lally, thank you for that. What a great story you've had in terms of your career. So to close out our conversation today, we've just got some quick questions to finish up on. So are there any other dream species that you would love to see in the wild?
Yes, the pygmy, the pygmy shrew, the Etrusca pygmy shrew. I saw it first time when I was doing my first degree, and I was so shocked that I couldn't believe that so small animal was alive. Its weight about 1.8 grams, and I cannot imagine how the babies will be.
Yeah, yeah, that would be cool to see. I'm sure probably hard work, but you've seen it once when you
Once,
was yeah.
once, in the northern part of Spain, in the Pyrenees.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. Yeah, probably very difficult to see. I imagine they're also very quick as well. So yeah,
It-
all the
uh,
best.
I should say that I could see it because it was captured in a
Right,
in a trap for animals alive. How do you say that? In a trap is a box where the animal come in, and then you know what I mean.
right. Okay,
It's a
for research or
shelter. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
are there any places that you would love to visit?
Yeah, New Zealand, because I would like to see the kakapo,
Yeah,
this bird who are unable to fly.
and how about zoos? Have you visited zoos? Do you have a favorite zoo that you've ever visited?
Montpellier, I should say. Montpellier, I liked very much.
Amazing. After a day fighting extinction, how do you relax?
Listening, microfield, tubular birds if possible.
Yeah, I can see how that would be calming and how that would help you unwind. How can listeners follow your work and the work of your organization?
Well, I think it is easy. In a browser, you can write my name, but using Eulalia, not Lali, of course, is my short name, Eulalia Moreno, and then if you add CSIC, which is my organization, you probably will find everything. And also, if you look for in the in my institute website, you can look for my name, and then you also will find it. And in the reintroduction project, also have a web page. So if you write reintroduction, Cuvier, Gazelle, Tunisia, Moreno, probably you will find the website of the Cuvier Gazelle. I think that is the right way of doing it.
Fantastic. So, Lali, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. We wish you all the best in the remainder of your career, and we certainly look forward to keeping up to date with all work surrounding the Cuvier's Gazelle.
Thank you to you, Jonny, for giving me the opportunity to talk in your podcast.
Sadly, that does bring today's episode to a close. As always, a huge thank you to you, the Conservationists Assemble community, for tuning in and supporting the podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode and wish to join the fight to stack the odds in conservation's favour, then please share this episode with your family and friends. Check out the links in the episode notes if you are interested in learning more about La Jolla and Lali's work. Don't forget there are plenty of ways to interact with the podcast by sharing your favourite photos and videos of the Cuvier's Gazelle or any of your favourite species. You can also send in your favourite memories from the time at your favourite zoo or experiencing nature firsthand. You can have your say by expressing species, topics, organisations or specific guests you would wish to have on the podcast. Perhaps you want to appear on an episode yourself if you have a topic you are particularly passionate about. You can do all of these things by emailing conservationists@outlook.com or by messaging on Facebook and Instagram. Until next time, this is Captain Conservation signing off. Over and out.